Lorena, we're honored to have you today and to have a conversation with you. Book are going to go back and forth asking you a few questions, and I have the privilege of asking you the first one. Lorena, when did you decide to run for mayor, and who was part of that decision?
Oh, that's a really good question. I decided to run for mayor in the place that I normally make big decisions, which was at my mom's house in central Washington state. So a lot of folks may or may not know that I actually grew up in a little town called Grandview, population 10,000. I grew up there as a migrant farm worker, and that's where I go back to sort of find my centering and to really make difficult, big decisions in my life, and this was certainly no different. So I went back to Grandview, and part of my decision making included my mom, who is my biggest mentor in life, and my husband, and other family members like my sister and my brothers. So it was a family decision for sure that just included a lot of contemplation. And I'll tell you, funny enough, we went on a hike. It was in the middle of December. It was it was right before the Christmas holiday. And we went on a hike. It was a beautiful sunny day with the sun shining and the sky was completely blue, one of those rare winter days in central Washington state. And it was quiet, and it also, this place we hiked also doubles as a firing range. So classic Yakima. And that's, you know, in that sort of peaceful, wide open field is where I decided that this was the right step for me.
Excellent, thank you.
In your opinion, what makes a good mayor? And can you share with us some examples of good, effective mayors that you look up to?
Yeah, you know, I think it's been a while that I've had a mayor that I feel like I can look up to be honest. And in large part it's because I've never seen myself and my community, which is an immigrant community, which is the Latinx community, represented in any of those prior mayors. And so for me, a good mayor is someone who is from community, someone who understands what the real issues are at that kitchen table for so many of our working families in the city. And to me, it's not just about that connectivity with the issues and the struggles that people who need government the most are facing and struggling with. It's also about being effective in brokering the deals that need to be had in order to effectuate huge transformational change to meet the needs of those people in our city who need us the most. So I think that mixture of compassion and understanding and connectivity needs to be able to be bridged into effective policy making through, you know, collaboration and coalition building, both with city council and also with external stakeholders.
Thank you.
And when we asked about the mayor, is there another mayor of another city or mayor that you've interacted with, or historically a mayor like, you know, I like LaGuardia and Cisneros on my list as historical mayors, but is there anybody, contemporary mayors? There's some. Yeah,
I mean Castro from San Antonio has been, who's an endorser of mine and supporter. He's been sort of paving the path, particularly for young Latinx leaders across the country. You know, went from there to serve our nation as the HUD secretary and working on homelessness and housing, and under the Obama administration, like he's done an amazing job to lift up, you know, the representation of Latinx folks in public service, but also really a hard worker and dedicated to making sure that those community voices are heard, both at the city level and at the federal level.
Is there a pressing issue that has not received enough attention so far in the mayoral campaign?
I'm not sure any stone has been left unturned.
Really?
No, I mean, I think my conversations with folks across the city have really been about some of the biggest issues that we face as a city. You know, the racial reckoning and the need to achieve racial justice, the issues related to addressing the experience of homelessness for thousands of people who experience it in our city on a nightly basis. And climate change has also been rising to the top, particularly since we're coming off the the most recent heat wave that we experienced. So I think people in the city are very astute, and they understand what are the most pressing issues, and those are the issues that we are being asked as candidates for mayor to talk about and to describe sort of what our vision is to accomplish those solutions to those issues.
Thank you.
What's your relationship with Amazon as a consumer? Are you a Prime member? Do you buy a lot of things from them? Are you a shareholder, current or former employee?
Definitely not a shareholder. I don't have that money. But I do, I have a lot of friends who work at Amazon, within a lot of the lower levels at Amazon, and I also am a Prime Amazon member. I try really hard to not purchase a lot of stuff from Amazon, largely because I'm concerned about the carbon footprint of the delivery. So I am very judicious about how much I use the delivery service, but I do use it for streaming. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So, in the time that I think a lot of us have been in Seattle in the last 20 years, just looking at the change, there's been a tremendous accumulation of wealth and a dramatic growth in poverty and the unhoused in our region. This is not a result of just one company's presence, but using Amazon as an example, Amazon's had a dramatic cost increase of costs of housing and the like in the area. So what strategy would you use to address growing inequality, which is an issue that's very important for you?
Yeah, there was income inequality is something we spent a lot of time on the campaign trail talking about. It is the root cause of homelessness. I think, unfortunately, we spent a lot of time talking about the symptoms of homelessness and not enough talking about the root causes. And in order to really make a difference here, we need to address the root cause. What is propelling people into a deep, deep state of poverty and trauma, which is homelessness? And the reality is that as corporations like Amazon, who experienced a 220% increase in their profit during the pandemic, as those profits increase, our housing prices become to increase, and income inequality deepens, and so does the wealth gap begins to widen, particularly for Black residents in our city and for Latinx residents in our city. So I think that the solution here is really to require, because there is such a nexus between economic growth of corporations and income inequality, it is critical in my mind for the next mayor to lead the path forward in requiring that large corporations finally pay their fair share in taxes to the city, to make sure that we can finally, once and for all, solve our most significant issues for good.
And what would that taxing mechanism be?
Well, there's a lot of, I'm not going to bore you with the details of progressive revenue taxation, but it has to be, in order for it to be progressive, it has to focus on, again, making sure corporations are paying their fair share. There could be lots of different models for that. The state just passed a historic capital gains tax, which is being challenged by, in the court by many of the corporate interests that would be subjected to paying that tax. If the capital gains tax survives, we have an opportunity at the city to cap that off with up to about a 1% rate on top of that. That would generate significant additional steady streams of revenue to really address the needs of affordability and housing in our city. So that's just one mechanism. We also have the opportunity to go back and take a second look at the income tax that I was supportive of, that the city council passed. We now have a Court of Appeals opinion that gives us a blueprint on how we can move an income tax forward. We would need to work with the law department and with others to make sure that we can create sort of carve-outs for working families, like a working families credit, to make sure that it truly is fair and progressive, and that would, of course, focus on the wealthiest individuals in the city.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What do you think is the best run department in the city of Seattle? And as a new mayor coming in, which department do you think will need your attention and focus early on? Setting aside SPD, but because we're going to come back to that.
Oh, okay. I was like, I already know how to answer this question. No,
Yeah.
I'm going to show my bias here a little bit on my favorite department. So my favorite department at the city is the Office of Immigrant and Refugee Affairs. In large part, I'm showing my bias because I helped to advocate for its creation back in the day during the McGinn administration. But I think it's one of those organizations that is small but mighty. It is very efficient. It truly runs its policies and programs through a community-centered lens, whether it's the Legal Defense Fund that I sponsored or some of the direct cash assistance programs during COVID that we've been funding. Mm-hmm. They have just been really excellent at being nimble, efficient, cutting out bureaucracy, and getting the help to the people who need it the greatest. And they do that through cultural competence and language competence. And I think that is a model that all of our agencies should aspire to achieve, right? Sort of a human-centered approach that cuts out the bureaucracy is really important. Which department needs the attention the most? I obviously think it's SPD, but you've asked me not to say that. So I would say that the department that I think needs the attention the most next will be the Human Services Department. We are set to transfer all of our human service department functions, including our homelessness investments and strategies, over to the King County Regional Homelessness Authority, which I currently serve on and would have an opportunity to continue to serve on if elected to be mayor. That transition is going to be pretty significant, and it's going to have impacts to our union represented employees, to our non-union represented employees, and to the body of work that we're currently investing in the area of homelessness and human services. So that's going to be an important transition that the next mayor has to get right.
Lorena, we've been impressed by the candor of people running for office, and as you know, New York City just finished a ranked choice election. Mm-hmm. If King County had ranked choice voting, and thanks to the work of Councilmember Zahale and others, we probably will soon, mm-hmm. Who would be your number 2 for mayor, assuming you are your number 1?
Your assumption is correct. I am my number 1 choice for mayor.
And then who'd be because you're spending time with these people, getting to know them.
Yeah. I mean, I think from like a sort of urbanist policy perspective, I think Andrew Grant Houston has been really good on a lot of these mm-hmm. sort of land use urbanist. How do we build a city mm-hmm. that is both sustainable and dense and still affordable? I think he brings a lot of really good, smart policy as a sort of architect in this space that I think is really would be really helpful to transforming our city into a 15-minute city.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So let's shift to talk about policing.
Yeah.
Policing has become a very, very divisive issue here mm-hmm. in the city and around the country. What is a roadmap for policing that you feel like a lot of communities could get behind in this city?
Yeah. I want to start off answering that question by just acknowledging that policing has been a divisive issue in our nation and in our city for generations. For some, people are just now tuning in to just how profound the impact of policing is on Black Americans in particular, but other BIPOC community members as well. And so I want to acknowledge that there have been many, many activists and advocates in our community who have been working diligently for decades on correcting the wrongs that our current policing model is based on. And as a civil rights attorney, for me, the roadmap has to first and foremost be centered on the promise of protecting people's civil rights and liberties, the promise of making sure that people can move about in this community without fear of being shot and killed by a police officer, especially our Black American residents here in the city of Seattle. And I think that the roadmap has to include making sure that we are looking at how we are reallocating funding from the police department to alternatives to law enforcement, community safety-based initiatives, are really critical to scale up so that we don't have such a almost 100% reliance on law enforcement approaches to deal with things like mental health crisis and substance use disorder issues or other behavioral crisis issues or just poverty, right? And so, the fact that we have a policing system in which people will call even the non-emergency line to report a stolen package and that we use resources to respond to those things, those are important quality of life issues. But my point is, we don't need law enforcement, we don't need armed law enforcement to be handling those kinds of calls. So increasing our investments in community service officers, for example, a program that we championed the restoration of while I was on city council. Increasing funding for our low acuity response teams that are known as Health One mobile trucks, right? These are the folks who respond to people who are just experiencing mental health crises on the street. They don't need to be taken to Harborview. They certainly don't need to be in contact with law enforcement. They just need some on-site treatment to get them to calm down, relax, and be healthy. Those are the kinds of alternative law enforcements that are going to be critical to creating a roadmap to equitable community safety in our community. And then the last thing I'll say is, making sure that we are focused on right sizing our police department is critical. And this is going to take time. This is not like flipping a light switch where one day it's on and the next day it's off. We need to have a slow sort of winding down of some of the current business lines that SPD does, and while we scale up some of these other alternatives that can really absorb that work, and it's going to take us a while to get that balance right, but I believe that it is possible, and it's going to require a lot of budget accountability on SPD's front, and it's also going to require us to make intentional reallocation and investment of real dollars into communities that have for far too long felt that they have been over-policed or under-policed, but not just properly have their community safety preserved.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So two-part question. The first is, there is a really strong sentiment that the policing, the history of policing in the United States and the way that policing is experienced by many is disproportional in lots of ways. At the same time, you have election results like you did in New York, where of the candidates, the one with perhaps the most conservative perspective on policing, including stop and frisk, gets elected as mayor. How do you rectify those two kind of competing strains that are happening simultaneously in New York, but also simultaneously in Seattle? You have different expectations. As mayor, how would you bridge that kind of odd divide that is further pushing people apart?
I mean, I think two things can be true at the same time.
Yeah.
I think it's true that people want to have public safety, and that we acknowledge that in some instances that means we will need to have police respond to a particular incident. What I think is happening, however, currently is that in instances in which people are calling the police, they are in some occasions themselves experiencing violations of their civil rights, either because of excessive force, deadly force, or some other kind of biased policing, right? So when I, as a person of color, call the police for help, I expect to receive help in a respectful manner, in a manner that is no regard to my race, and that is going to be responsive to the thing that I'm calling about. What is happening now, however, is that people are saying, listen, sometimes I don't call the police. We hear this in public safety surveys that come out of Chinatown or International District, where members of that community say, I'm not calling the police department because I have a lack of confidence that they're going to address the issue that I'm calling about. Either timeliness or I just don't trust that they are there to serve the need that I'm expressing. And so, yes, it is true that people want to be able to call police when they need them, but it is also true that there is a lot of lack of confidence and trust of what is going to happen when law enforcement shows up. And so we have an opportunity to really, thread the needle there and say, look, like, we are going to reserve our armed law enforcement for particular high level type of violent crimes, and we're gonna meet your quality of life concerns through a different kind of model. That model, in my mind, could be something like the Community Service Officer Program, which is widely beloved, right? So I think, again, people want their quality of life issues met. It does not mean, however, it does not mean that people, I believe in this city, I don't think people are willing to compromise on protecting life and liberty from the use of deadly force of officers. And so I think that is really important, right? Like, we want to be safe. We understand that in some instances that means that law enforcement will need to be called in, armed law enforcement will need to be called in, but under no circumstances are we as a city willing to compromise on protecting life and liberty from police violence in our city.
So early in your administration, you'd be selecting a new chief of police. What would that process look like, and is there any lessons you learned from Chief Best's tenure and departure from the department?
I mean, I think the chief of police is an important decision. I do think it's important to acknowledge that regardless of who the chief is, the buck stops with the mayor. It is the mayor's responsibility to hold the chief accountable and to hold the police department accountable. Mm-hmm. So the chief has to be a partner and a willing partner to the mayor who is going to be able to deliver on many of the things that we've just been talking about that I don't need to repeat. But I think the process will be community driven. We'll have to have a national search. It'll be sort of a task force or a selection committee to give the mayor a recommendation on who the next chief should be. That process is largely defined by ordinance. So the more important part is who's going to be on the selection committee. What will that selection committee process look like in order to give me as the next mayor, if elected, 3 solid candidates to choose from with clear direction about where sort of what the qualities are that should be most important. And for me, the qualities that are most important are someone who is willing to push against the status quo, somebody who really fundamentally believes in transforming the policing system and being a partner in developing that roadmap of public safety and policing that we were talking about earlier, by bringing together national experts, local experts, community members to really, again, push against the status quo of just protecting the existing model of public safety. That's going to be a tall order to find that individual, because there are very few people in our nation who can be a chief of police. So it's going to be a little bit like looking for a needle in the haystack, which is why I think it's important to remember that while it matters who the chief of police is, it also matters significantly that the mayor is the one who is the final decision maker, and the buck always stops with the mayor as it relates to policing in our city.
Thank you.
Can you talk a little bit about your vision for a more effective relationship between the city of Seattle and King County and all of the other cities in King County? How do you see that relationship, and a vision for a more equitable and connected region?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think that might be one of the ones we don't get asked very often, is sort of how do we show up as a regional partner? It's tough because Seattle is seen as, one of the most prosperous areas, because we are, and we are an economic engine in many ways, and we have, a lot more, sort of a bigger footprint, bigger. I guess we take up a little bit more space in these rooms than some of these smaller cities. I've had an opportunity as a council member to work on a lot of regional committees and task force, and through that work have had an opportunity to develop relationships with regional partners, both at the staff level but also at the elected level. As I think about the question that you're asking, I think we're already, testing the waters and having good experience in terms of how we are approaching the work around the Regional Homelessness Authority that does have representation from suburban cities, that also has representation from King County, and also has representation from Seattle. And I think it provides a good model for how we can tackle these big issues as a region I would be really excited as mayor to frame up a conversation about how we replicate this for housing and affordable housing in particular. We know that our BIPOC communities, immigrants and refugees included, continue to be displaced from our city to South King County in particular. And so thinking about how do we take a regional approach to the pressures of housing and housing displacement is I think would be a really exciting opportunity for me as the next mayor of the city if elected.
Thank you.
Lorena, we are in Chophouse Row, in Cloud Room is upstairs. It's a co-working space. It's the group of people who really were interested in this conversation. The kind of connecting theme is often small businesses here. So you have McKinney Howe, who runs Plum Bistro, which provides great jobs for lots of folks. If you would, for a minute, describe or name a small or mid-sized employer that you admire and why, especially when it comes to equity, employee compensation, and diversity.
Let's see. God, I think there's so many great employers throughout our city. I'm going to stay away from the one that my husband works for. Because that seems biased. I think you obviously mentioned McKinney, and I've been a huge fan of McKinney for a long time. She was really helpful to us when we were doing a lot of work around the $15 minimum wage and through One America, and I think she really is like the kind of business owner that lives her values through her workplace model, and I've been a big fan of how committed she has been to both her progressive values, but also sort of making ends meet as a small business owner. But I think there's hundreds of McKinneys running around in our city. I mean, no offense to McKinney, she is one of a kind. Yeah. But I think there are so many small employers that I know of personally that I've had an opportunity to really meet and get to know over the last 6 years that it's hard to just single out one person, and I'm really grateful that our small business community has been so resilient, particularly this last year, and that they continue to, in conversations with me, always remind me that their first priority is taking care of their workers, and that's just really commendable and admirable.
Excellent. Well, McKinney will be glad that we gave her a little love today.
She's great.
She is.
If we talk to people who've worked for you, what would they say about your best and worst qualities as a leader and manager?
My best quality. I think my best quality is that I am not a micromanager. I really like to surround myself with highly competent individuals. And the large reason for that is because I really want to give people an opportunity to just spread their wings and learn, and not feel like I'm pulling every single lever or have to see every single little thing. You either trust your staff or you don't, and good communication is key to that as well. What's my worst quality? I work entirely too much, but I'm also a perfectionist. So I like to trust folks, but then I want it to be perfect.
I totally get that.
Lorena, we've talked a little about this. The city did some efforts in this case, both some successful and some less successful. But post-COVID, as we're moving out, please describe what strategies for a more equitable recovery you'd like to see. What does it look like? How would you, as we charge forward into Seattle that might have more of the values that you've already spoken about?
Yeah. I definitely invite folks who are watching this to go to my website. We have about a 4-page plan on what we think an equitable economic relief plan is. And I won't go through all of the particular details because I think people can go to my website and check it out. But really, for me, it's about making sure we have a mayor who is going to prioritize BIPOC-owned businesses, LGBTQ-owned businesses, women-owned businesses, particularly within our neighborhood business districts. I think downtown gets a lot of attention, and I'm not calling to question the fact that they get all of that attention. What I am saying is that I think that City Hall, unfortunately, has been persuaded at the expense of our neighborhood business districts to focus on downtown, and I think that creates a detriment citywide. We know that we have hundreds, thousands of small business employers throughout our city that have been here in some instances for generations, and we need to work really hard to make sure that they are preserved and protected. And if we are funneling limited resources at the city to subsidize, interests that don't need those subsidies in parts of the city, in certain parts of the city, then I think we end up running the risk of seeing our Main Street businesses die in our neighborhoods, and I worry about that. And right now we have a limited opportunity to receive over the next 5 years federal funding, that the next mayor gets a choice on how to invest those dollars within our community. And I'll tell you, on the Seattle Rescue Plan, I was really excited to be able to negotiate a consensus plan that has been widely well received. But we fought hard in that negotiation room to say, no, we need to make sure that more of these dollars are going to neighborhood business districts, not just to organizations that have institutionally had power, but to those who don't have the ability or the opportunity to associate and be part of a major business association with a lobbyist. That was really important to me, exactly because these dollars are one-time dollars, and this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to really revitalize and create that renaissance within our neighborhood districts, to make sure that we are building towards the ultimate vision of having vibrant neighborhoods that are 15-minute neighborhoods throughout the entire city.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your vision for how we can build a city where everyone belongs? How can we, the entire range of all the communities that you've spoken about, that you're committed to, how can we all belong here?
Well, I mean, I think we need to create space for everybody who has historically lived here, and we do that by tackling head-on our exclusionary zoning laws that have for far too long restricted people of color and low-income people from living in our nicest, most walkable, most amenity-rich neighborhoods. So that means making sure that we are moving our single-family home zones towards what they really are, which is family zoning. This is where we want all of our families to live. And it should be about the people, not about the structures, not about the kinds of brick and mortar that's being built somewhere. It's about who do we want to live in these neighborhoods. And so we can do that by eliminating these single family home zones throughout our city, which represent 80% of our residential land is strictly zoned for one kind of housing type. That one kind of housing type is $850,000 on average in our city. $850,000. And when you think about the fact that you need 20% of that as a down payment to get in, my people can't pay that. We're priced out. Game over. We're either living in an apartment for the rest of our lives, or we're now going down to Tacoma or somewhere that isn't here. And so we have to be serious about allowing for additional housing choice in single family home zones. And we have to pair that with anti-displacement and anti-gentrification strategies to be able to make sure that we are creating, and those anti-displacement strategies are things like home purchasing programs, right? Allowing for things like co-ops and land trusts so that communities can come together and buy, land and build community in a neighborhood for their own. There are ways we can do this that have been modeled in cities across the world that I think we are way far behind the ball on, and that's the kind of innovation and innovative thinking that I think is going to be required to really push back on this displacement that our communities are experiencing currently.
Thank you.
Before you go over to the dynamic world that is West Seattle and Del Ridge and all the amazing things happening there and discuss those issues. We have a lot of kind of people in the world who are undecided. So you could take folks here, you know, Clara, Lucky, Nam, Lucy, undecided. So, and Lucy, how many followers do you have on whatever socials? Lots.
Many.
A few thousand. So, you know, Lucy's the influencer that we're looking to. Lucy will determine. So, for those people who might be debating you and someone else, or really, you know, find interesting, Lorena, why you?
Why me?
Yeah.
You know, I think I just would say that, like, we are a city that is right now, as we sit here today, we are struggling with many crises in our city. We have, on any given day, depending on what you count as a crisis, 4 official crises in our city: housing, civil rights, climate change, homelessness. And I think that what is really important for people to know about me is that I bring to this particular position a set of, you know, proven experiences to be able to lead at the local level. I have been working diligently on behalf of the people for the last 6 years in this city, and I have made some really significant sacrifices, including leaving my maternity leave early to come back to serve the people of the city during the COVID crisis last year. I did that because I fundamentally believe that government plays a significant role in lifting up our communities out of poverty and addressing income inequality head on. And in order to do that, we need somebody who is going to be a progressive, bold, transformational leader. And I have a track record that shows that I can lead on progressive, bold policies in our city. And I want to be able to build on that record and to be able to build effectively on that record. I need to be elected the next mayor of this city. So I'm looking forward to you know, putting those relationships to work and to really building the consensus and the coalition and the momentum towards addressing these root causes that are really harmful to so many in our community. So hopefully voters will give me an opportunity to do that.
May I ask a follow-up question?
Yeah.
A lot of undecided voters that I've been talking to, I think, see the point that you're making about voting for someone with experience. And at the same time, the culture of the city of Seattle for the last 4 years specifically has felt so toxic to so many. The relationship between the mayor and city council, the employees of the city reporting so many really big issues around racial equities, the very things that our city's been so committed to, people are saying have been terrible.
On the mayor's side, I want to be clear.
Well, I think that's what we don't know. We don't know, like, how can our next leader go about undoing this toxic culture? And also, I think a lot of people feel reluctant to vote for someone who's been in office during this time. So can you talk about the why you in that context, and also how you can go about changing this culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think the relationship between the executive and the legislative branch is really important. You know, we saw this play out. Let's take it out of our little silo of Seattle on the federal government level, right? We had a Congress that was fighting all the time, and we had, you know, whatever the semblance of a Trump administration is. I hesitate to call it an actual functioning executive branch, but that I think is a reality that occurs within our government when there is a lack of a meaningful relationship between the executive and the legislative branch. You know, I am really proud to have been elected unanimously amongst my council members to be their council president, and you know, everything from the most, you know, sort of conservative person on the council to the socialist on the city council agreed that I would be a good fit to be the administrator, the manager, and the leader of the city council. And And I share that because I think it's important for voters to remember that the city council that currently exists is going to be the city council that's in place for the next mayor. And I do think it is critically important for the mayor to leverage her relationships, existing relationships with existing council members, to focus on policy and not on politics. And that's what I've been doing as council president, internally with this council, is working every day to identify what are your priorities? Why is it your priority? Who are you working with? How can I be helpful? How can I call you and express a concern with you about the direction that we're headed? That's quiet, hard work in the background that should be happening in the background, so that when we introduce a piece of legislation, whether it's a big budget decision or a big policy issue like Jumpstart Seattle payroll tax, we can present a unified front as a city that this is the right direction for our city. And we are better served by a mayor who understands and respects the role of the legislative branch in our city, which was duly elected. These are 9 individuals who were duly elected in a free democratic process. The executive of this city has to understand that, appreciate it, respect it, and not just that, but lean into it and leverage the talents and the skills that exist within the city council to really, again, focus on policy and get away from the politics. We will all be better served when that happens, because we'll be making good policy for the city, and we'll be doing that together. I'm uniquely positioned to do that because I'm currently working with these council members who in some instances are dear friends of mine. In other instances, I have just an extraordinarily good and respectful professional relationship with.
Thank you.
Yeah.
We know how busy you are, how much you have going on. Thank you for your time. We appreciate you taking the time to meet with us.
Of course, thank you.
Yeah, and I will add, I met you at a time when my family was in the midst of a struggle, and we worked together in that setting. And I think the humanity of all the great businesses and people in the area we are now sees your full humanity and the experience that you've had in the last year. So we acknowledge that and just say thank you. It's really amazing to spend more time with you, Lorena.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks,
Thank
Tom.
you so
Thanks,
much.
Victor. Yeah.
That's great.
All right.
Okay, it's a wrap.